Why do they celebrate? Because they have their scapegoat. The sacrifice is dead. For now, catharsis reigns. Some of them are just caught up, going along, virtue signaling, but some need these moments. And whatever rivalries and pains they have converge on a stranger, Kirk. This is what René Girard describes.
You need conservatives to be afraid of getting killed when they go to events. They don't feel like there's any fear.
The irony is that some of this frustration comes from their ideology, which encourages them to transgress healthy bounds, family, sex, and from a society that doesn't at all conform to the hated conservative ideal. An ideology whose postulates necessarily imply personal and social dysfunction because they celebrate disordered desires and mental illness will require its adherents to blame someone else for their inevitable frustration. It will tend towards lashing out and, in this case, celebrating murder together, becoming symbolically complicit in it, can act as a binding agent for a time. To fix them, to lift the pain longer than bloody catharsis can, the ideology in whose name they celebrate death would itself need to die. Speaking of deviating people's hurt away from its actual causes and real solutions, Trump might do something similar for his base, siphoning off people's frustration at radicalism, crime, degrading social condition into policies that somehow end up sending more of their money abroad and more of their data into certain companies' servers. Some measures by the Trump White House, if it does use this moment as a springboard for policy, may be positive, certainly. But if, as the administration has implied, so-called hate speech is made into a crime, Americans of all persuasions will have a problem the way we do in Europe. Celebration, on the left, awkwardly played off the conspiracy theory that Kirk's alleged killer, Tyler Robinson, was actually on the far right, which took a fair bit of mental gymnastics.
Inscriptions on the 3 unfired casings read, "Hey fascist!" ! Catch, and 3 down arrow symbols. Oh, Bella Ciao, Bella Ciao.
There are some holes and oddities in the official story. But the idea that he was to Kirk's right rather than left has caught on. According to a YouGov poll, a lot of people believe it. Because inherited truth TM, as opposed to capital T, does depend on power. You can't renounce the struggle for how things get remembered, for how others and you yourself will be remembered, for the public sphere. Because even if your kids believe what you teach them, the culture around them will see them isolated, besieged, if you cede that ground. The difficult truth about martyrdom is that the martyr doesn't get to decide what he's a martyr for, any more than he always decides to be a martyr in the first place. He's not around to determine how he gets remembered. Even people who weren't famous or political, but whose death becomes symbolic of social breakdown, can be used for good or for ill. And I'm not against propaganda if it serves positive ends. It matters to us what the political martyr believed. On some level, it's as if he shows us an idea is worth dying for. Of course, people can die for bad ideas, but that's the psychology at play in part. TPUSA has chapters in over 800 U.S. university campuses. Massive membership. Its leader could have ended up sitting in the Oval Office one day. But there's a civil war on the right, in the U.S. as in Europe. And when it comes to foreign policy, Kirk had been increasingly out of sync with Donald Trump and with his own donors.
There were hundreds of thousands of Israelis taking to the streets. That's all gone, Patrick. Netanyahu now has an emergency government. I think some questions need to be asked. Was there a stand-down order? 6 hours? I don't believe it. Israel's the size of New Jersey. When I took a helicopter ride from Jerusalem to the Gaza border, it's 45 minutes. Did somebody in the government say stand down? I gotta be careful the way I say this. They're gonna try to ethnically cleanse Gaza. I mean, I don't use that term lightly, okay? They're talking about basically removing 2.5 million people from there.
He did not like Bibi Netanyahu, and he said that to me many times. He was appalled by what was happening in Gaza.
Like, I remember Charlie calling me and saying, I'm really worried. And this was back in the summer when the Iran strikes were sort of first being contemplated. He said, I'm really worried this is going to become another regime change war in the Middle East that we get trapped in. By the way, he did eventually support the strikes on the nuclear facility while simultaneously saying no more.
But the big dynamic going on here was that he still needed these kids. He still needed his young activists, and they were abandoning Israel after the Douglas Murray debate. He told me privately that there was very little that he disagreed with. And if you go listen to what I said on that show, I was going pretty hard.
The Israeli Prime Minister, for his part, had reportedly tried to invest tens of millions in TPUSA, an already friendly organization, which reminds us of how all-important a resource American public opinion still is. Cultivating a reliable stable of future politicians and voters in the U.S. is still a priority. Ideas matter, and politics does ultimately rest on consensus, tacit or implicit. But whether that funding offer was made, per Max Blumenthal's reporting, there was and is clear interest in TPUSA and in what the American public perceives Kirk's legacy to be. Spurned foreign funders will continue to assert their interests.
A tumultuous, stormy meeting during the first week of August convened, according to multiple sources, by the billionaire Bill Ackman, who is close to Netanyahu. And Charlie Kirk was, according to one source, hammered for allowing Israel critics to appear at his events. Charlie Kirk walked away, according to one person, feeling like there was an attempt to blackmail him. He refused any offers of funding. Charlie Kirk, according to a longtime friend of his, considered Netanyahu a disgusting bully, and this stands at complete odds with the picture Netanyahu has tried to paint since Charlie Kirk was killed.
Now, to be fair, Andrew Kilvett, executive producer of The Charlie Kirk Show, said that he checked with Kirk's staff and this meeting with Ackman was not, in fact, hostile. So there's a conflicting report there. However, he also says concern over Tucker Carlson's presence at TPUSA events was indeed raised. There was a clash there. It's important to bring all this up to run interference on any narrative, making Kirk a martyr not for conservatism really, but for America's special relationship with Israel in a context in which that relationship can encourage Israel to escalate in the Middle East and entangle the U.S. in a military quagmire.
You know, he wrote me this letter and he says, one of my greatest joys as a Christian is advocating for Israel.
According to Candace Owens, Netanyahu's quoting of this letter is selective, as it goes on to criticize the Israeli government. She apparently claims Kirk gave her this letter privately, or she obtained it in some other way. However, Eric Bolling, a Turning Point USA board member, says Kirk had distanced himself from Owens.
And Charlie, to his credit, kept a cordial friendship with her for years, but it hasn't been a communication pipeline back and forth between the two for many years.
In any case, the letter going on to criticize Netanyahu makes sense and is consistent with what others have said about Kirk's private opinions. That said, Kirk was obviously still broadly pro-Likud in terms of his public-facing persona, at least. The Trump administration, for its part, will align people's rage with its own agenda. Legitimate anger can be used to impose illegitimate control. And I've made plenty of videos on the tech oligarchy and MAGA turning into MAGA, as in AI, surveillance state. I don't know what Kirk's exact ideas were or what they would have been going forward, God bless him and his family, but what matters now is the use people might make of it, making light of his death to dehumanize conservatives further and normalize violence against them in the case of some, and on the flip side, the possible political use the Trump administration might make of it. It isn't the nature of political violence that determines what the state's reaction will be, it's the state itself, conditioned to a greater or lesser degree by popular reaction. Whenever there is a crisis or political violence, institutions will react based on their prior assumptions and agenda. So the question is always whether you trust the people in power and the ability of society or specific groups to affect them. The question isn't how angry you are. It's how people are going to capitalize on your anger. In any case, people are remarkably awake, skeptical, pushing back. So push back. We do need to participate. The reaction to Kirk's death should inspire good people to fight for control of the narrative. You cannot give up the culture. I'd like this channel to be mythology and symbolism, Bible, romantic poetry, cinema, slop, Warhammer. Alas, we have to address the slop fiction that is the current timeline as well. And it all works out in the end because that's the beauty of it. You're in this struggle anyway, and it's an adventure and a beautiful struggle to be in. Okay, as always, thank you very much. I wanted to make a very short video on what had happened. Felt right to address. Join me on Substack, Twitter. Do follow me on Twitter. I need to grow that account. Become a member if you would like. You can help me out with on Buy Me a Coffee. Subscribe if you would like to, and until next time.